Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you've been following U.S. news, you know the topic of the unauthorized immigrant population. Well, it's incredibly polarized, and it seems like every discussion is filled with numbers that are confusing. Sometimes they feel wildly contradictory. How many people are we actually talking about here? Is that number going up, down? And maybe the biggest question, why? Can't seem to agree on an answer. Our sources for this deep dive are pretty robust. We're looking at DHS's own stats office, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, respected places like Pew Research Center, the Center for Migration Studies. Our mission today is really to cut through some of that noise, understand how they get these numbers, and look at the really dramatic, pretty rapid changes we've seen in this population, especially in the last few years.
Right. And, we have to start with being precise. That means tackling the terminology first. When researchers define this group, they mean foreign-born non-citizens who aren't legal residents. And crucially, this includes people who might have temporary protection from deportation. Think DACA recipients, people with TPS, or those paroled into the U.S. recently.
Okay, so that's a key distinction right there. It's not just people who cross without inspection.
Exactly. And the term researchers often prefer is unauthorized immigrant. We tend to avoid illegal immigrant because, well, critics rightly point out it hides legal complexity. Things like overstaying a visa are often civil matters, not criminal ones. On the flip side, some criticize undocumented immigrant because they feel it downplays the lack of formal authorization to be here permanently. So unauthorized is kind of the middle ground for researchers.
I appreciate laying that groundwork because whatever label we use, there's this one fact that seems to have completely reshaped the conversation recently. According to Pew Research Center data, we've seen this incredibly rapid, dramatic shift starting around 2021. Pew reported an increase of 3.5 million unauthorized immigrants just between 2021 and 2023. They say that's the biggest two-year jump on record.
It really is a game changer.
That definitely changes the whole conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack how we get these numbers because, as you said, they're just nowhere near uniform.
Yeah, the core challenge is pretty straightforward. The U.S. doesn't do a census asking about legal status. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
So every number you hear, whether it's on the news or in a political debate, it's an estimate. And yeah, those estimates can vary a lot.
And how much variation are we talking about?
It's actually kind of staggering. It really highlights how tough it is to count a population that often avoids detection.
Yeah.
If you look just at 2022 and 2023 estimates, well, the floor and ceiling are miles apart.
No.
For January 2022, DHS estimated 11.0 million. The Center for Migration Studies, CMS, they were right around there too. 10.94 million. Pretty close.
Okay, so around 11 million back then.
But then you jump to 2023 estimates. Pew Research Center revised theirs up to 14 million. And then you have groups like FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, with estimates projecting towards 18.6 million for 2025.
Hold on. From 11 million just a couple of years ago to potentially almost 19 million. That's the population of a medium-sized country. How can experts looking at the same thing be millions of people apart? It seems wild.
It does sound wild, but most of the main players, DHS's Stats Office, OHSS, Pew, CMS, they generally rely on the same core method. It's called the residual method. Conceptually, it's pretty simple. First, they estimate the total number of foreign-born people living in the U.S. They usually use the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, the ACS, for that big, broad survey.
Okay, step one, total foreign-born count.
Step two, subtract the legally resident foreign-born population. This number comes mostly from government administrative records. DHS tracks things like naturalized citizens, refugees, lawful permanent residents, LPRs, people on certain visas.
Okay, so total minus the known legal.
Find the remainder, the residual, that's your estimate for the unauthorized population.
So the concept seems straightforward enough. The devil must be in the details then to get that, 8 million person gap between some estimates?
Absolutely. It's all in the technical details and assumptions. There are three big challenges. First is the undercount. It's just hard to get unauthorized immigrants to respond to surveys. They often try to avoid detection. DHS might assume something like a 10% undercount. But Pew uses really complex custom models to adjust for who they think they missed. If you just tweak that undercount assumption by a few percentage points, boom, your final number changes by millions.
Wow. Okay, so that's basically guessing how many people didn't answer the survey or hid their status. Makes sense that would cause variation. What's number two?
Number two is immigration modeling. How many authorized immigrants leave the U.S. each year? There's no direct count of people leaving. So researchers have to build these complex models to estimate that outflow. This adds a huge layer of assumption. Different models trying to guess who left can give you really different results for the starting pool.
So these numbers that sound so concrete are built on layers of, frankly, educated guesses about who is missing, who left. Okay. And the third challenge, you mentioned differences in how they start the count.
Right. It's about the base population they use in the calculation. OHSS and Pew typically start with all foreign-born people found in the survey data and then subtract all legally resident people, including naturalized citizens. CMS uses a slightly different approach. They start only with foreign-born non-citizens and then subtract those with temporary status. So even though they're all using that residual idea, starting with slightly different groups affects the final number. It's why they often land in the same ballpark, but can still be millions apart.
Okay, so the exact number is fuzzy, maybe inherently uncertain. But what seems undeniable is this dramatic shift in who these individuals are and where they're coming from. You mentioned the population was generally declining from a peak back in, 2007?
That's right. Pew data showed a peak around 12.2 million in 2007, and then it mostly trended downward until about 2020.
And now that trend has just violently reversed?
It really has.
Yeah.
And the demographic shift is maybe the clearest story in the data. Mexico is still the largest single country of origin, no doubt, but its share of the total unauthorized population has dropped massively. Think about this. Back in 2010, Mexicans were about 59% of the unauthorized population. By 2023, according to Pew, that share had plummeted to just 30%.
Wow, 59% down to 30%. That's a fundamental restructuring. It's clearly not just a story about one border anymore. It's become a global phenomenon reflected in these numbers. So where is the fastest growth coming from now?
The really rapid growth between 2021 and 2023, it's heavily concentrated among arrivals from South America and the Caribbean. Specifically, you see huge increases from Venezuela, Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua, Ecuador, also Ukraine and Peru. According to Pew, the estimated unauthorized populations from all those countries more than doubled in just that 2-year window. Venezuela is a stark example, from about 195,000 unauthorized in 2021 to roughly 650,000 in 2023, just explosive growth.
It feels important, though, to distinguish between this new rapidly growing group and the folks who've been living here maybe for decades unauthorized. What does the data say about those longer-term residents?
That's a really important point. The population that entered before 2010 still makes up the vast majority, something like 79% of the total unauthorized population as of 2022, according to OHSS.
Yep.
So while the new arrivals are driving the recent growth, the bulk of the population has been here a while, and they are aging. The number of unauthorized immigrants aged 45 and older actually increased by 61% between 2015 and 2022. Meanwhile, the younger group, 18 to 34, that number dropped by almost half, 49%.
So we essentially have two distinct populations living under this one umbrella term, a long-established aging community and this completely new, younger group arriving from places we didn't see in such large numbers before.
Precisely. And this newer group is tied directly to another shift, the method of entry. Historically, illegal border crossings were the dominant way people entered without authorization. Then, after about 2010, visa overstays actually became a slightly larger source than border crossings for a while.
Right, I remember that discussion shifting.
But then this 2021-2024 surge introduced yet another major factor, maybe the biggest one recently.
Which is?
The rapid expansion of people arriving who have some kind of temporary status, or at least protection from deportation.
Okay. So this isn't just about crossings or overstays anymore.
Not entirely. We're talking about huge numbers of asylum applicants, people processed and released by Border Patrol with a notice to appear in court later, and people granted parole through specific programs like CHNV, that's for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, or people granted temporary protected status, TPS. This has fundamentally changed the legal profile of a large chunk of the recently arrived unauthorized population.
And the numbers really bear that out, right? I think Pew noted that in 2023, something like 6 million unauthorized immigrants had some form of temporary protection from deportation.
That's the number they estimated, yeah, which is a massive jump from their estimate of about 2.7 million just back in 2021.
So if you take Pew's 14 million total estimate for 2023, that means over 40% of the entire estimated unauthorized population had some kind of precarious temporary status shielding them from immediate removal at that point. That's huge.
It's a fundamental shift. Now, shifting gears slightly to the economics of this surge, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas did some interesting work here. They looked at the socioeconomic profile of this new wave of arrivals, and they found, generally, that the newer unauthorized immigrants are primarily low-skilled relative to the existing U.S. workforce. About 64% have a high school degree or less.
But even with that lower skilled profile, their role in the labor force is significant, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. We're talking about an estimated 9.7 million unauthorized immigrants working in the U.S. in 2023. That hit a record 5.6% of the total U.S. workforce. They are a major component of labor supply.
And heavily concentrated in certain sectors, I assume?
Very much so, in industries that often struggle to find native-born workers. Think 15% of the construction workforce, 14% in agriculture, about 8% in leisure and hospitality. They're filling really essential jobs.
The Dallas Fed also looked at their financial situation, right?
Yeah.
They use this term hand-to-mouth consumers. What's that mean exactly?
Right. It means they have significantly lower wealth and especially liquid savings compared to native-born households. Basically, their savings could cover less than 1 month of their typical spending. Compare that to native-born workers who, on average, could cover 6 to 7 months. So they tend to spend pretty much what they earn quickly. They live and consume within their immediate means, which has some unique economic effects.
And it's worth remembering, too, that even in this precarious state, they do contribute financially, right?
That's often overlooked. Unauthorized immigrants pay payroll taxes if they're working on the books, sales taxes whenever they buy things, sometimes property taxes indirectly through rent. But they're generally ineligible for most major federal benefit programs, things like Social Security retirement benefits, food stamps, federal welfare. So they pay in, but mostly can't draw out from those big programs.
Okay, what about where they live? Is it still heavily concentrated in just a few states?
It's still concentrated, but it's becoming less so over time. The top states in 2023, according to Pew, were California with about 2.3 million, Texas with 2.1 million, and Florida jumping up significantly to 1.6 million. And the biggest increases between 2021 and 2023 were actually in Florida. They had an estimated 700,000, followed by Texas adding 450,000, and California 425,000. But the overall trend is towards deconcentration. Back in 1990, something like 80% lived in the top 6 states. By 2023, that was down to 56%. So it's spreading out.
This brings us up to the really dramatic shifts, the extreme volatility we saw play out in 2024 and into 2025. It really shows how much policy can drive these numbers, maybe more than anything else. It seems the population kept growing rapidly through early 2024.
Preliminary data suggested that, yes, but then something changed sharply. If you look at monthly current population survey data, which captures all foreign-born people, legal and unauthorized, it shows a really remarkable decline. About 1.5 million fewer foreign-born individuals between January and June of 2025.
A drop of 1.5 million in just 6 months.
In the total foreign-born count, yes, which strongly suggests a significant and rapid drop specifically in the unauthorized population, driven primarily by policy changes under the new administration in 2025.
That scale of reversal seems unprecedented in such a short time, and it lines up exactly with reports of ramped-up deportations and, crucially, the removal of many of those temporary protections we just discussed. Things like ending the CHNV parole program for about 500,000 people, TPF expiring for hundreds of thousands. When that protection disappears, the count shifts, potentially very quickly.
Absolutely. When status is revoked or expires, people either leave, get deported, or fall deeper into the shadows, making them even harder to count accurately, but likely reducing the overall estimate. And you see the policy impact clearly at the border, too. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, reported encounters hit a new historic low in June 2025, just over 25,000 nationwide.
25,000, compared to the peaks we saw.
Exactly. It represents a massive 94% decrease from the peak apprehension levels back in February 2024. The data strongly suggests the enhanced enforcement approach had an almost immediate deterrent effect on new arrivals, alongside the increased removals.
Okay, let's wrap up with the big economic question everyone asks, especially concerning this surge from 2021 to 2024 before this recent policy-driven decline. Did that massive influx of people contribute significantly to the high inflation we experienced in the post-pandemic years? It's an argument you hear a lot.
Right, and that's precisely what the Dallas Fed report tried to model. They called it the Wickselian dilemma, which sounds fancy, but it's about two conflicting economic pressures from immigration. On one hand, immigration increases the labor supply, which should theoretically reduce wage pressures and be disinflationary, cools things down. But on the other hand, more people means more consumption demand, more need for housing, investment, etc., and that is inflationary. It heats things up.
Okay, so a push and a pull. Which force won out, according to their analysis?
Well, they modeled the specific characteristics of this particular surge, remember, mostly low-skilled, concentrated in labor shortage sectors and acting as those hand-to-mouth consumers. And their conclusion was pretty clear. The supply side effects, more workers, and the demand side effects, more spending, roughly canceled each other out.
Really? So no net impact?
They found the net impact of that 2021-2024 unauthorized immigration surge on overall aggregate inflation was likely negligible, pretty close to zero.
That's a fascinating finding given how politically charged the issue is. So, what a complex picture we've painted. A rapidly shifting demographic driven by global events, concentrated in key labor sectors, subject to huge swings based on policy. And estimates that vary by millions.
Indeed. And, it really cycles back to the definitions we started with and the nature of the status many hold. Given that millions of these individuals, especially in recent years, held these temporary, easily revocable protections, DACA, TPS, parole statuses that can be, and in some cases were, removed almost overnight, well, it shows the definition of unauthorized itself isn't static, it's fluid. And maybe that leaves us with a final question for you, the listener, to think about. When we see these numbers fluctuate so wildly based on policy, and we understand the economic role these individuals play, how should we think about and describe a population whose presence might be economically essential, but whose legal status can be so precarious and subject to sudden change?